The cry in the alley. The rain fell softly that night, coating the streets of downtown in a quiet shimmer. Most people had already taken shelter, hiding behind the warmth of windows and walls. Keanu Reeves, dressed in a plain hoodie and jeans, walked alone with his head slightly bowed. He had just left a late meeting at a nearby film studio and declined the offer of a ride. He enjoyed walking, especially after dark, when the city grew still and honest. The night had a way of revealing things the daylight often hid. As he turned a corner into a narrow alley near an old bakery, something stopped him. It was faint at first, so soft it could have been the wind, but no, there it was again. A cry, not the shout of a person or the growl of a cat. It was high-pitched, small, trembling. A baby. Keanu froze for a moment, his heart suddenly racing. He moved toward the sound, deeper into the shadows of the alley where the rain didn't reach. Behind a stack of broken crates and a worn-out blanket, he saw a small bundle, soaked, shaking, crying. His breath caught in his throat as he knelt down. It was a baby, no older than a few weeks. The skin was pale from the cold, the lips trembling. Whoever left the child had given them nothing but an old towel and a note, half tucked into the folds of the cloth. Keanu's hands shook as he reached for the baby and held them close to his chest. The small body was ice cold, the sobs weaker than they should have been. "Hey, it's okay now," he whispered gently, brushing the baby's cheek with his fingers. "You're safe." He looked around, but the alley was empty. The world felt cruel for a moment. How could someone do this? How could anyone leave a life like this behind? He pulled out his phone and called 911, explaining what had happened. The operator assured him help was on the way, but there was hesitation in her voice when he mentioned the child was freezing and barely responsive. "Sir, please keep the baby warm. Wrap them in anything you have. Paramedics are coming." Keanu took off his hoodie and wrapped it around the tiny body. He didn't care about the rain or the cold hitting his own skin. He only cared that the cries were slowing and the baby wasn't moving much anymore. He whispered to the child softly, holding them close as he rocked them back and forth. "You're not alone. I've got you. I promise." 10 minutes passed. They felt like hours. Finally, the flashing red and blue lights appeared at the end of the alley. A young paramedic named Lila jumped out of the ambulance, her face tight with concern as she rushed over. Keanu handed the baby over slowly, afraid of letting go. "They were left here. I don't know how long." Lila nodded, wrapping the child in thermal blankets and checking their pulse. "They're weak, but they're alive. We need to get them to the hospital immediately." Keanu hesitated. "Can I come?" She paused, recognizing him, but said nothing about who he was. "Yes, come with me." The ride to the hospital was silent except for the beeping of machines and the soft words Lila spoke into her radio. Keanu sat beside the tiny stretcher, watching the baby's chest rise and fall with machines helping every breath. At the hospital, a group of nurses and doctors moved swiftly. Keanu was asked to stay outside the emergency room doors. He stood there, arms crossed tightly, his clothes still wet, his heart pacing faster than it had in years. This wasn't a movie. This was real, raw, fragile. An hour passed, then 2. Finally, a doctor in scrubs came out and approached him. "You were the one who found the child?" Keanu nodded. "How is the baby?" The doctor gave a tired sigh. "We stabilized them. They were severely hypothermic. If you hadn't found them when you did, we would have lost them." Those words struck him deep. He had almost walked another way, almost ignored that soft cry. "Do you know anything about the baby?" the doctor asked. Keanu shook his head. "Only that they were left in the alley. There was a note." The doctor showed him the paper, still damp but legible. It read, "Please forgive me. I can't care for her. Her name is Emily. I hope someone kind will find her." Tears stung Keanu's eyes as he read the words. They were full of pain, fear, and guilt. Someone had loved this child once. Enough to name her. Enough to hope someone else might give her what they couldn't. Over the next few hours, Keanu didn't leave the waiting room. He sat there watching through the glass as baby Emily was moved to a recovery unit. He brought coffee to the nurses. He asked questions about her care. The staff noticed this wasn't just a man who stumbled upon a lost child. He was staying. He cared. By morning, social services arrived. They wanted to know everything: where he found her, what time, what condition she was in. And then, the woman from the agency asked a question that caught Keanu off guard. Would you be willing to foster her temporarily? You're the only familiar presence she has right now. He stared at her, unsure if he heard her right. Me? It's temporary, she said. We'll continue searching for any relatives. But sometimes, the first connection a baby forms, it matters. Keanu looked through the glass window again. Emily's small hand had escaped the blanket and was curled into a soft fist. He didn't know her story. He didn't know his place in it. But something had shifted in him, something deep. He turned to the woman and said quietly, "Yes, I'll take care of her." But outside the hospital walls, someone else was watching. A woman with tired eyes and a trembling hand stood across the street, hidden behind a parked car. She had left the alley long before the ambulance came, but she had returned when the guilt grew louder than her fear. Now she watched the man who held her baby with such care, and for a moment something in her heart began to break. What she didn't know yet was that she wasn't the only one with a past full of secrets, and neither she nor Keanu knew just how deeply their lives were about to intertwine. The mother is still out there, but who is she? And why did she leave Emily behind? What happens when Keanu brings the baby home, and secrets from his own past begin to rise? The past knocked softly. Keanu Reeves stepped through the wide glass doors of his home, carrying baby Emily close to his chest. The drive from the hospital had been quiet, the silence filled with a mixture of awe and responsibility. The moment he crossed into the hallway, a strange warmth spread through him. His home, once a quiet sanctuary of solitude and routine, now held the soft breathing of a life entirely dependent on him. He had never imagined becoming a temporary guardian, especially under such fragile circumstances. Yet, the moment Emily had wrapped her tiny fingers around the sleeve of his hoodie in the hospital, something had shifted in his chest, an ancient kind of instinct, unexplainable, undeniable. The guest room, once filled with boxes and untouched books, had been quickly turned into a soft nursery overnight. He hadn't waited for approval from social services to begin preparing. He had simply known, deep down, that she was going to stay longer than anyone expected. As he laid her gently in the crib, he watched her tiny chest rise and fall with each breath. She looked so peaceful, so unaware of the storm she had survived. And yet, something about her calmness spoke volumes, like she had known she was waiting for someone, maybe even for him. The following days moved like waves, soft, quiet, unpredictable. Diapers, bottle feedings, sleepless nights filled with cries that tugged at the heart. But Keanu didn't complain, not once. He moved with quiet patience, reading parenting blogs late into the night, calling pediatricians for advice, even video, chatting with an old friend who had recently become a father. Emily began responding to him with small coos, the first real signs that she felt safe. The first time she smiled, a real, sleepy smile. He froze. The world paused, and in that simple curve of her lips, he felt a kind of joy he hadn't known since he lost his own daughter years ago. It was something the world rarely spoke about. Before the fame, before the roles that made him a household name, Keanu had once dreamed of being a father. He and Jennifer, the woman he had loved deeply, had planned for a family. But fate had been cruel. Their baby had been stillborn, and, months later, Jennifer was taken in a tragic accident. The grief that followed nearly broke him. He buried it under work, meditation, long motorcycle rides, and the quiet sadness he carried in his eyes. But now, years later, holding Emily in, his arms felt like something broken inside him had slowly started to heal. Yet just as the cracks began to mend, a knock came at the door that would shake everything. It was a rainy morning when it happened. Keanu was feeding Emily in the kitchen, humming softly, when he heard it. A soft, hesitant knock. Not forceful, not impatient. It was the kind of knock that held guilt and fear. He opened the door and saw a woman standing there, soaked from the rain, clutching a bag close to her chest. Her clothes were worn, her hair pulled back in a loose, messy bun, and her eyes, those eyes were filled with something heavy. She looked barely 20. I think you found her, she said, her voice almost breaking. Keanu didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Something in his chest told him exactly who she was. The girl took a shaky breath, her hands trembling. I'm her mother. He stepped outside and closed the door gently behind him, shielding Emily from the conversation. For a long moment, there was silence. The woman, her name was Mia, explained everything. How she had come to the city with dreams that were stolen by manipulation and heartbreak. How the father had left. How she had lived in shelters, eaten scraps, and eventually found herself pregnant and alone. She had tried to keep Emily, tried with all her strength. But the hunger, the fear, the cold, it had pushed her into a corner. The night she left her baby in that alley had been the worst night of her life. She had run from guilt, unable to sleep, unable to think. But she had come back, too late to undo what she had done. She had seen the news, recognized Keanu's face, and now stood there with tear-streaked cheeks ready for anything, even arrest. Keanu listened quietly, watching her face. She was not a monster. She was a girl who had been broken by the world. Still, the law was clear. She had abandoned a child. Social services would not look kindly upon this, no matter her reasons. And yet, he couldn't ignore the way her eyes softened when she asked, "How is she?" He didn't invite her inside. Not yet. But he told her Emily was safe, fed, warm, and cared for, that she smiled in her sleep, that she was starting to laugh, and that she looked for voices. Mia broke down in tears, falling to her knees on the porch. She wasn't asking for sympathy. She only wanted to know her daughter was okay. Later that day, Keanu sat with the caseworker from social services, explaining everything. He didn't sugarcoat what Mia had done, but he didn't demonize her either. He said she needed help, real help, housing, food, therapy, and maybe, if the courts allowed it, a second chance. The woman from the agency, Mrs. Hartley, listened carefully and agreed to evaluate the situation. "What you're doing," she said quietly. "Most wouldn't." Keanu shook his head. "I'm just doing what's right." For the next week, Mia was placed in a temporary women's shelter with access to counseling and support. Emily stayed with Keanu, but something was changing. Every few days, Mia was allowed to visit under supervision. At first, she stood far, away, unsure. But slowly, Emily began to recognize her scent, her voice. There were no screams or cries, only soft eyes and a strange sense of peace. Keanu watched closely, never stepping away, always alert, always protective. He had grown deeply attached. He didn't know if he could let her go. And then, one evening, after Mia's visit had ended, Keanu sat alone on the porch with Emily in his arms. The stars were out. The wind was soft. She was sleeping peacefully. But he wasn't. The thought had returned. Something he hadn't admitted to anyone yet, not even himself. He didn't want to give her back. He looked down at the tiny girl, her hand wrapped around his finger, and whispered, "You saved me too, didn't you?" But in the quiet distance, a shadow moved. Someone else had been watching, the visits. Not Mia, not the social workers. A man, tall, rough, silent. Someone from Mia's past. And he was about to change everything. Someone dangerous from Mia's past is watching. Who is he? Why is he here? And what will happen when he steps out of the shadows? Keanu thought the danger had passed, but the real threat may just be beginning. Shadows from the past, the days had become quieter again, at least on the surface. Emily was beginning to settle into a rhythm, one that filled Keanu's house with soft lullabies, tiny giggles, and the kind of chaos only a baby could bring. Every morning started with a bottle and ended with a story told in a soft, steady voice. Every night, Keanu sat beside her crib, staring at her tiny sleeping form, wondering how a stranger's child could now feel like a part of his soul. The once silent rooms now pulsed with purpose. But beneath the calm, something else stirred. A feeling he couldn't shake, like eyes watching from just beyond the edge of light. And he was right. It began with small things. A parked car outside, his gate that hadn't moved for 3 days, a man standing across the street for a few minutes longer than what felt normal, the sound of footsteps late at night that disappeared when he stepped outside. Keanu had grown up in a world where intuition was sharpened like a blade. His early life had taught him to listen to the quiet things, to trust that chill in his spine. And now everything inside him told him something was off. Then, one afternoon, after a scheduled visit between Maya and Emily at the park, something changed. Mia had been getting better. The counselor said she was making progress, engaging more, healing from the trauma of her past. But as soon as she saw the man sitting on a bench across the playground, everything inside her shifted. Her face turned pale, her body stiffened, and without a word, she stood up and walked away. Keanu noticed instantly and followed her. She didn't speak until they were out of earshot. "He's here," she whispered. "He found me." Keanu frowned, trying to understand. "Who?" "Troy," she said, barely managing to speak the name. "Emily's father." Keanu's hands clenched involuntarily. The name alone was enough to thicken the air around them. Troy had been the man who promised Mia a better life, only to strip her of her dignity, her money, and her safety. He had vanished before the baby was born, leaving her stranded in a rundown motel room with nothing but hospital bills and an eviction notice. She had never seen him again, until now. "He wants her," Mia said quietly, her voice trembling. "He said once that if I ever left with the baby, he'd find me and take her." Keanu didn't say anything for a moment. His jaw tightened, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low and steady. "He won't touch her, not while I'm breathing." They reported the sighting immediately. Ms. Hartley, the social worker, promised to file an emergency notice with Child Protective Services and coordinate with the police. But bureaucracy was slow. Protective orders took time, and Troy, whoever he was now, didn't seem like the type to wait for legal permission. 2 nights later, the quiet was shattered. Keanu had just finished feeding Emily when the motion sensor light outside the back door flicked on. He checked the security screen. Nothing there. But when he opened the door to look, a small envelope had been slipped through the fence. No address. No handwriting. Inside was a photograph. It was a picture of Emily taken through the park fence that very afternoon, her small face frozen in a candid smile, completely unaware of the eyes watching her. Keanu stood still, the picture in his hand, the baby in his arms. Something inside him cracked. This was no longer about past mistakes or regrets. This was a threat. A line crossed. He reached for his phone, made 2 calls, one to the police, one to a private investigator he trusted from a past project that blurred the line between acting and real-life survival training. He didn't care what it cost. He needed to protect Emily. She wasn't just a baby anymore. She was his heartbeat. The next day, Keanu didn't take Emily to the park. He didn't open the blinds. Instead, he turned his home into a fortress. Cameras, reinforced locks, background checks on everyone from caseworkers to nurses. He even took Emily for a quiet DNA test to protect her identity in case things escalated. He had never felt fear like this. Not in movie stunts, not in fame, not even in grief. This was different. This was primal. As the days passed, Mia kept visiting, but the weight of Troy's presence had unsettled her. She was afraid to stay at the shelter and eventually asked if she could sleep in the guest room temporarily. Keanu hesitated, but something in her eyes begged for safety he couldn't deny. And so, the strange trio, an actor, a wounded young mother, and a baby caught between them, settled into a fragile rhythm. The house was filled with the scent of formula and warm meals. Sometimes they laughed. Other times they didn't speak at all. But every moment mattered. Then, one night, the investigator returned with news that made Keanu's blood run cold. "Troy isn't just some runaway boyfriend," he said grimly. "He's tied to something bigger. Trafficking, underground gambling, fake IDs, and from what we found, he's in debt. Deep debt. Word is, he plans to sell the child to pay it off." Keanu sat in silence, the weight of those words crushing his chest. Sell her. Not kidnap. Not custody. Sell. Like she was a thing. Like she wasn't a breathing, laughing, crying little girl who had changed his entire world. The investigator continued. "He knows where you live, Keanu, and he's getting desperate." The room went quiet. Even Emily seemed to sense the shift, crying softly in the background. Keanu stood up and spoke with a resolve he hadn't felt in years. "I want full custody." Ms. Hartley shook her head. "That's not how this works. You're not a relative. Not yet. And even though Mia abandoned the child, she's making progress. She's the biological mother. The system favors reunification." Keanu turned to Mia. She was silent. Still. Thinking. Then she stepped forward and whispered, "Then maybe the system needs to hear the truth." And what Mia said next would change everything. What truth is Mia hiding? Why is she suddenly willing to give up rights to her own child? What does she know about Troy? And how far will he go? The storm is closer than anyone realizes, and Keanu is about to risk everything to protect the little girl who now holds his heart. A mother's burden, a father's vow. The silence in the room was sharp, like the breath before a scream. Keanu stood there holding Emily, her tiny fingers curled around the edge of his shirt, her head resting against his chest. His eyes, dark and searching, didn't move from Mia. She stood with her hands by her side, her jaw clenched, her heart beating so loud it echoed in her ears. Miss Hartley watched both of them from across the living room, her clipboard untouched on her lap, her pen resting silently between her fingers. The investigator leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, ready for anything but expecting nothing close to what was about to be said. Maya took a step forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never told anyone the full story about Troy, not even the people at the shelter. I lied to protect myself. And her." She gestured to Emily. "But I can't lie anymore. Not if it means he could come near her again." Keanu's arms tightened protectively around the baby. "Go on," he said gently. Mia swallowed hard, her hands shaking now as she began to speak. "When I met Troy, I thought he was my way out. I was working late shifts at a diner in Sacramento, living out of a rented room, sending money back to my mom. Troy walked in one night with a flashy smile, an expensive coat, and promises. He said I was beautiful, told me I deserved more than minimum wage and sleepless nights. He made me believe I could have a different life." Her eyes were wet now, but she didn't wipe them. She let the tears fall. "I didn't realize until it was too late that I wasn't the only girl he said those things to. He moved me into a small apartment, kept my phone under his name, told me not to talk to anyone from my past. And then, when I got pregnant, everything changed." She took a deep breath, her voice trembling. "He got violent, not every day, but often enough to make me stop arguing. When I told him I was keeping the baby, he laughed. Said, 'Good. I know people who'd pay a fortune for a newborn.' That's when I knew I had to get out. But getting away from someone like Troy isn't easy. He kept all my documents. I had no phone, no ID. I barely had money to eat. So I waited until he left town for a weekend, packed what little I had and ran." Mia turned toward Keanu now. "I ended up in Los Angeles, sleeping in my car, hiding in shelters, begging for food. I had Emily in a free clinic with fake papers a woman helped me get. I thought I could protect her. But when I saw Troy again, that night, I knew he had found me. I panicked. I didn't know what else to do. Leaving her in that alley was the worst thing I've ever done, but I thought, maybe, just maybe someone better than me would find her. And then you did." There was a long pause. No one spoke. Miss Hartley finally broke the silence. Do you understand what you're admitting, Mia? If you sign over your parental rights now, it's permanent. You can't take it back. And given the danger surrounding Troy, there will be an investigation. The court might ask for testimony. Are you prepared for that? Mia nodded slowly, her voice steady now. I'd rather stand up in front of the world and tell them the truth than risk Emily being taken by a man like him. I'm not her future, but he sure as hell isn't either. Keanu stepped forward, gently passing Emily into Mia's arms. It was a gesture full of trust. Mia held her daughter for what might be the last time as a mother. She kissed her forehead and whispered something no one else could hear. Then, with shaking hands, she looked at Mrs. Hartley and said, "Give her to him. He's already her father." It took days to process. Social workers, lawyers, child psychologists, background checks, home visits. Keanu never missed a meeting. He answered every question honestly. When asked why he wanted to adopt a child that wasn't his voice didn't waver once. Because she is mine. Not by blood, but by love. In the middle of it all, Troy made his move. Late one night, while Keanu was putting Emily to sleep, the house alarm blared. A camera showed a shadow jumping the side fence. The man wore a hoodie, gloves, and carried a crowbar. But he didn't get far. Keanu was already at the door when he arrived, standing calm but ready. The private investigator had already contacted the police earlier that week and placed a tracker in the area. Patrol units were nearby. The moment Troy tried to break in, he was tackled to the ground and handcuffed. As they dragged him away, Troy looked up at Keanu, his face twisted in rage. "You think this is over? You think you're her father?" He spat on the ground. "You're just a babysitter in a castle built on lies." Keanu didn't flinch. He stepped forward, looked the man dead in the eye, and said, "She was never yours, and she never will be." Within hours, Troy was officially charged with attempted kidnapping, trespassing, and endangering the welfare of a minor. Deeper investigations revealed his involvement in multiple trafficking attempts. His trial was pending, but the evidence was strong. Strong enough to keep him locked away for a long time. The next hearing was a quiet one. The courtroom was nearly empty. Mia sat in the back row wearing a plain dress and holding tissues in both hands. Keanu sat in the front with Emily in his arms. Ms. Hartley stood beside him, nodding with quiet encouragement. The judge looked over the documents, the statements, the reports. Everything had been laid out. Emily's abandonment, the danger she had been in, the transformation in her care under Keanu. After what felt like an eternity, the judge finally looked up and spoke in a tone that felt both heavy and kind. "It is the opinion of this court that the best interest of the child, Emily, is to remain in the permanent custody of Mr. KeanuReeves. This court recognizes the commitment, care, and stability he has provided. The petition for full adoption is approved." Keanu didn't move. He sat there, eyes filled with tears that refused to fall, heart pounding in his chest. Emily reached up and touched his cheek, her fingers soft and warm. In that moment, the weight of everything he had carried, the grief, the loneliness, the fear, melted into a single undeniable truth. She was his daughter now, not by force, not by chance, but by choice. As they left the courtroom, Mia approached him slowly. She looked different somehow, lighter, freer. She smiled at Emily, then at him. "Thank you for loving her when I couldn't, for saving both of us." Keanu placed a hand on her shoulder. "You saved her too. You let her go when it mattered. That takes strength most people don't understand." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Will you tell her about me?" "One day," he said. "When she's ready, and when you're ready too." Mia left quietly that day, walking away not as a failure, but as a woman who had found redemption in her hardest decision. Keanu watched her go, then looked down at Emily, who was now peacefully asleep in his arms. The sky outside was clearing. For the first time in a long time, he felt like the world was finally making sense. But not far from them. Inside a cold prison cell, Troy was watching the news report of the courtroom decision. His eyes were dark. His rage hadn't disappeared, and though the bars held him now, his influence stretched further than anyone expected. Troy is behind bars, but his threats aren't over. Who else is involved in his dark world? And how far will they go to tear apart the peace Keanu has fought so hard to build? The battle may be won, but the war is just beginning. The storm behind bars the days following the court's decision were filled with a quiet kind of joy. Not the loud, celebrating kind, but a soft, healing one that settled into the corners of the house like sunlight after a long storm. Keanu had legally become Emily's father, and though the journey had been tangled with pain, fear, and uncertainty, there was now a stillness to his life that felt unfamiliar, but welcome. Every morning, he rose to the sound of Emily's laughter. Every night he tucked her into bed with a story told gently, slowly, as if the words themselves were cradling her to sleep. For the first time in many years, he didn't feel alone. He didn't just exist, he lived. But peace, as he had learned long ago, was often a fragile thing. And shadows don't vanish just because you close the door. 3 weeks after the adoption was finalized, Keanu received a phone call that turned his stomach. It came from Detective Ramos, the officer assigned to Troy's case. Her voice was calm but sharp, professional, yet laced with quiet urgency. "Mr. Reeves, there's something you need to know," she began. "We've intercepted a letter written by Troy from inside the prison. It wasn't addressed to you or anyone official. It was to a man named Dario Kessler. Does that name mean anything to you?" Keanu frowned, pacing the floor of his home office, as Emily napped in the next room. "No, never heard of him." "We have," she continued. "He's on our radar. Ex-military, turned underground contractor. Known for surveillance, intimidation, bounty collection. And he has no problem operating outside the law. The letter didn't say much, but it mentioned your name. And it said Emily is still worth something to the right people." Those words sent a chill through Keanu's spine. He looked at the framed picture on the wall, one of him and Emily at the beach, her tiny hands covered in sand, her eyes squinting against the sun. She had no idea of the world she'd narrowly escaped, but that world wasn't done with her yet. Detective Ramos advised him to increase security, stay alert, and keep his schedule unpredictable. She also promised they were doing everything they could, but Keanu knew better than to rely solely on others when it came to protecting the ones he loved. That night, he made a quiet decision, one that involved making a call to an old friend, Lucas, a former stunt coordinator who had spent the past decade training special forces and close protection units overseas. Lucas didn't ask why Keanu needed him. He just said, "I'll be on the next flight." Within 48 hours, Lucas arrived at Keanu's home, surveyed the property, updated the security systems, added hidden cameras, and taught Keanu advanced hand-to-hand techniques that went beyond movie choreography. They worked late into the night. Every night after Emily had gone to sleep, preparing for something they couldn't see but both knew was coming. Meanwhile, Keanu tried to maintain a sense of normalcy for Emily. They went to the zoo, walked quietly through bookstores, shared pancakes in the kitchen while music played from a dusty old radio. She had grown attached to him in ways words couldn't capture. When she reached for his hand in the middle of the night, when she smiled just because he entered the room, he felt something sacred unfold in his chest. She had filled a space inside him that he hadn't even realized was empty. But on the 6th morning of Lucas's stay, everything changed. They woke to find the front gate wide open. The camera footage had been wiped. The wires had been severed, cleanly, professionally. The house had not been broken into, but someone had gotten close enough to make a statement. Lucas checked the perimeter, then held up a black card he had found tucked under the welcome mat. No message, just a red circle drawn in marker. He handed it to Keanu and said quietly, "This isn't over. Someone's testing your defenses." Keanu didn't panic. Instead, he moved with calm purpose. He called Detective Ramos, filed the report, then packed a bag with essentials for Emily. Lucas arranged for them to relocate to a secluded property in Northern California. owned by a retired stunt driver who owed Keanu a favor. It was a modest place, small, surrounded by trees, impossible to find unless you knew where to look, and it was safe. For now. But even there, the past found a way in. One morning, while Emily was napping and Lucas was out scouting the trails, Keanu stepped onto the porch and found a small drone hovering silently just outside the window. It buzzed, for only a second before speeding off, vanishing between the trees. Keanu ran to grab his car and followed the path he thought it had taken, but it was gone. What he found instead was a discarded phone on the gravel road. It had one photo on it, Emily, asleep in her crib. His hands trembled as he stared at the screen. This wasn't just someone looking for money. This was personal, calculated, obsessive. Keanu made a choice then. He called Detective Ramos and said, "We can't keep hiding. It's time to end this." With her help, they traced the drone's serial number back to a distributor linked to a private security firm. And from there, they uncovered the trail that led them to Dario Kessler himself. He had rented a warehouse on the outskirts of Los Angeles under a false name. He was no longer just watching. He was planning something. But what? Lucas suggested a stakeout. "If we can catch him in the act, we can shut this down forever," he said. Keanu agreed, but he refused to stay behind. "I'm not sitting on the sidelines while someone threatens my daughter," he said quietly. "We end this. Now." And so, one late night, they parked across from the warehouse, hidden in the shadows of a construction site. Hours passed, then finally movement. A black van pulled up. Two men stepped out, one of them tall with a scar down his jaw. Dario. They began loading crates into the van. Lucas checked the camera. "That's equipment, surveillance tech, maybe worse." Keanu called Ramos, who was already en route with backup. But as they waited, something unexpected happened. A man stepped out of the shadows inside the warehouse. Troy. Keanu's heart froze. Troy had escaped custody. Somehow. And now he was standing in the middle of a warehouse filled with tools of destruction, laughing with the man he'd hired to steal back what was never his to begin with. Ramos and her team arrived just in time. The raid was fast, brutal, and decisive. Dario tried to run. Lucas tackled him to the ground. Troy raised a weapon. Keanu disarmed him with a swift, practiced move that left no room for mercy. As the dust settled, Keanu stood over the man who had haunted their lives for far too long. Troy looked up, broken and furious. "She's not yours," he hissed. "She never was." Keanu leaned down and whispered, "But she never belonged to you either, and now she's free." The arrests were final, the charges were unshakable, and this time Troy wasn't escaping. Back at the house, Keanu found Emily asleep once more, safe in the arms of a neighbor who had watched her during the operation. As he looked at her, he felt something deep inside, something like peace. Not the absence of trouble, but the strength to face it and come out whole. And as he held her close, the sky outside began to lighten. Dawn had come. The long night was finally over, or so he thought. Just when Keanu believes the danger has passed, a mysterious letter arrives, one with a name he hasn't heard in years. A name tied to a secret even deeper than Emily's past. What truth has yet to surface, and how will it change everything they've built together? The letter and the legacy. The quiet that followed the arrests brought with it a strange sense of stillness, like the world was finally beginning to breathe. Again. The house was no longer filled with the tense whispers of strategy or the soft beeping of security monitors. The doors no longer creaked with suspicion, and the nights no longer felt like traps waiting to be triggered. Emily slept deeper now, curled in her crib with a stuffed bear in one hand and the piece of safety wrapped around her like a second blanket. Keanu, too, felt the weight in his chest begin to ease. He still woke up early, still walked the perimeter of the property before dawn. But now it felt more like habit than necessity. The shadows had been chased away, or so he believed. One Sunday morning, while Keanu was tending to the garden out back and Emily was playing inside with colorful building blocks scattered across the living room floor, the mail carrier arrived. He left a single envelope on the doorstep. No stamps, no return address. Just Keanu's name written in ink that had started to smudge, as if whoever wrote it had trembled while doing so. He didn't see it until hours later, when the sun had begun to dip behind the trees and Emily had fallen asleep with a crayon still in her hand. Curious but cautious, Keanu picked up the envelope and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper. One name sat in the center of it, written in sharp, deliberate script. Amelia Claire Hawthorne. Underneath it, a sentence that made his blood run cold. You need to know the truth about Emily before it's too late. He sat down slowly, the letter still in his hand, his mind racing. The name meant nothing to him, at least not immediately. But there was something about it, something familiar that lingered at the edge of memory like a ghost in fog. He read the letter again and again, trying to decipher any clue, any hint. He called Lucas, Detective Ramos, even Miss Hartley, but none of them recognized the name. And then, as night fell, he remembered. Years ago, before his life had slowed down, before he had turned inward after the tragedies that shaped him, he had done a quiet, anonymous donation to a struggling clinic that had reached out through a charity event in the valley. It was a women's center, one that helped young mothers and survivors of abuse. He had signed the check without attaching his name publicly, wanting no attention, no credit. The woman who ran the center had written him a thank you letter. Her name was Amelia Claire Hawthorne. He had only met her once. She was gentle, kind, and carried the weight of 100 untold stories in her voice. She had dedicated her life to helping the invisible, those who fell between the cracks, those who were hurt but not seen. And now somehow she was reaching out to him again from beyond memory, tied to a child who had already changed his entire world. Keanu wasted no time. The next morning, with Emily strapped safely in the back seat and Lucas by his side, he drove out to the address linked to the clinic. The road stretched long into the desert lined with dust and silence until finally, an old adobe-style building came into view. The sign outside was weathered but still legible. Claire's Refuge. Inside, the air was warm and filled with the faint scent of lavender. A few volunteers moved quietly from room to room, some folding laundry, others preparing meals. A woman, in her 60s, approached him slowly, her silver hair tied back, her hands clasped. "You came," she said softly. "I wasn't sure if you would." Keanu nodded, holding Emily gently against his chest. "You sent the letter?" "I did," she replied. "Please, come with me." She led them to a private office, the walls lined with photographs of smiling women and children, a mixture of pain and hope captured in every frame. Once they sat, Amelia opened a locked drawer and pulled out a small red folder. She placed it on the desk and looked up at him with eyes that carried the burden of truth. "You deserve to know what really happened before Emily was left in that alley," she began. "Mia came here once. Just once. It was right after Emily was born. She was scared, starving. She had bruises she tried to cover. She didn't tell me much, but she left this." She opened the folder to reveal a handwritten note and a birth certificate. The certificate was shocking. It listed Emily's birth mother as Mia Garcia, but the father's name was blank. And attached to it was a photograph of Mia as a teenager, standing beside another young woman. "This," Amelia said, pointing to the woman beside Mia, "is Natalie Hawthorne, my daughter. She was a nurse at a private clinic in Sacramento, the same one where Mia had first gone for prenatal care. Natalie took care of her, became her friend, helped her escape Troy's grip. But something happened. Natalie died in a car crash 2 weeks later, and Mia never came back until you found her again." Keanu's mind spun. He looked at Emily, sleeping peacefully in his arms. This girl had been wrapped in stories far deeper than anyone knew. Rescued by one woman, saved by another. Fate had carried her through hands, willing to sacrifice everything for her safety. But then Amelia leaned in, her voice even softer now. "There's more. Natalie was pregnant when she died. The baby didn't survive. It broke me. But Mia, she named her child after Natalie. "Emily Claire," she said, "your daughter helped me live. I'll never forget her." The room fell into a silence so thick it was hard to breathe. The truth wasn't just about who Emily was. It was about the legacy she carried. The memory of a woman who gave hope to a stranger, and a promise that traveled through pain and time to find its home in Keanu's arms. As they drove back that evening, Keanu couldn't stop thinking about how deeply connected their lives had become. He had believed he found Emily by chance. But the truth was, everything had been quietly weaving together for years. Every decision, every heartbreak, every act of kindness. It had all led to her. Weeks passed, and the world began to move forward again. Troy remained behind bars. Dario faced federal charges. Mia, now free from fear, found work at a community center and visited Emily often, not as a mother reclaiming a child, but as a sister remembering love. Lucas returned to his life, but called every weekend, always asking, "How's my favorite little fighter?" And Keanu? He lived every day with purpose. He learned how to braid tiny pigtails, how to make pancakes shaped like bears, how to turn rain into laughter and fear into bedtime stories. He wrote a children's book inspired by Emily, started a quiet foundation to help single mothers, and every night after reading her a story, he whispered the same thing into her ear before she drifted to sleep. "You saved me." Years would pass. Emily would grow. One day she would learn everything: the alley, the danger, the woman who named her after a fallen friend, the man who stood between her and the shadows. And when that day came, she would understand that her story didn't begin with being abandoned. It began with being chosen. And so a man who had known loss found love again. A baby who had been discarded found a father who would never let her go. And in a world often filled with pain and chaos, one act of kindness became the start of something far more powerful than anyone could imagine. Not fate, not luck, just love. The kind that shows up when you least expect it and changes everything.